Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We are joined again with Rusty. Rusty, where we wrapped up last time, the Gulf War had finished and we were kind of talking all the success of the F-111s. However, in between that conversation and this conversation, a couple things have popped up in the world. And kind of given that we were talking offline about your relationship and how much time you'd spent in the Middle East. So can you tell us a couple of the stories that we kind of mentioned offline of, given the status of the Middle East today, kind of some of your interesting history stories that you have from both kind of Iranian Air Force, as well as Pakistanis and Omanis, and everybody. But just kind of your thought on that and how these ties have gone a lot deeper than just, a couple years to centuries old, pretty much.
Sure. It was late 1978. I was Chief of Weapons and Tactics on the 494th Fighter Squadron at Lakenheath, and we deployed to an exercise called Midlink 78. Midlink was part of a CENTO treaty exercise that had partners, sometimes Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, the U.S., sometimes France. And what it would do is it was test the Allied fleets out in the Persian Gulf and in the Sea of Oman. And was also looking at cooperation and training with each other's dissimilar type of not only aircraft, but tactics. And we deployed for about 45, 50 days to Masrur Air Base, which is just outside, southwest of Karachi. And what the Pakistanis asked us to do was, of course, their arch rival, India, they had a war just a few years before that. So a lot of our sorties, they had us go fly out to the Indian border out to the east and come back in and do low level and then end up by doing an airfield attack at Masrur. And I remember with the squadron commander, we were talking to the general who commanded the base, and we said, what are your restrictions for doing the airfield attacks at Masrur? He leaned forward and he said, just don't break my windows and don't hit any buildings. We would come in, normally feet wet, at about 20 feet, 50 feet was high off the water, and about just under supersonic because we didn't want to break his windows. Subsonic, maybe 615, 620 knots ground speed. Doing that, we found that the hard part for us was to, at that low, either on radar or visually, trying to acquire a target. And our targets that we're playing, within the squadron, was the maintenance ramp where we had our aircraft. And we would give awards to, ranks to the guys who hit the target more accurately, and then, of course, by time, hit your TOT. Going back, we thought this was not going to be a big challenge because at that time, the Pakistanis had Mirage 3s, they had MiG-19s. They're actually Chinese version MiG-19s. And we thought, well, they don't have any radar out there. This is pretty easy. The first couple times I did that, we didn't really count the defenses that Pakistan had. They had no radars. They had a series of people on the ground with binoculars and telephones, sometimes radios, and they would visually pick up our aircraft. Of course, the terrain out there is flat. Unlike the more western part of Pakistan, it looks like Arizona. I mean, it's very mountainous and very dry. So we'd come in. We didn't even check six a lot of times. We didn't know that they were effectively picking us up every time, and they would be following us close at 6 o'clock. In fact, the first time we hit our ramp and, 620 knots or so, we came in and landed, and I asked my crew chief, I said, what'd you think about that attack? And he said, you guys are pretty good, but that MiG-19 on your ass was even better. And that's when we realized, don't discount an adversary, they were our allies, but an adversary in training that had older equipment, but they had dedication, and they had a system that actually worked. Conversely, this is just before the Shah fell, and I was in lead of a force ship. We did an airfield attack and a port attack at Charbaha in Iran, and we came through the Baluchistan area of southwestern Pakistan into south eastern Iran. It came down through the mountains to hit the port and the airfield. And the Iranian F-14s couldn't pick us up. So we had to come back 2 times, each time successfully, not terrain masking, slowing down, even the last time wagging our wings so they could find us. So my lesson learned from that, as I told the squadron when we got back, I said, here we have flying against, for training, people who have older equipment, but yet they make it work. And then we flew against people who had, at that time, the F-14 was state of the art, and they couldn't find us. So don't always think that because you have somebody who's got outdated, antiquated equipment, they're not going to be confident. It was a good time.
Still,
we did a lot of. We were supposed to go up to what I thought that my disappointment. We were supposed to go up to the northern Pakistan, to the Khyber Pass, and they were going to have a dinner for us and all that. And for some reason, there were things going on in Pakistan. We couldn't do that. But I felt that the ride itself from our hotel in Karachi to the Masra Air Base, I've studied a lot of cultures and things like that, but it was the most unique place I've ever been in my life when you see people of all walks of life driving these trucks. I mean, Kurds and Turks and Sikhs and just every kind of thing you could possibly believe. It was an experience, a real experience. Flying back was kind of rough because we were supposed to fly back over Iran, and we were supposed to actually air refuel with Iranian KC-747s. But because this is when the Shah is falling, there are demonstrations in a certain part of the country, we had no other way to get back to England. So our intel was telling, at first they said, we're going to arm you. Then they thought, that's a pretty stupid idea. But then they realized that the only thing we could do is fly over the country. And they were coordinating with the State Department. And we were told that if anything happens, you have an emergency, to go southern Iran, to an Air Force base down there, because they were less involved in the revolution. And a lot of those Iranian pilots, like Esfahan and Khorramshahr, air bases towards the southern part of Iran, they had gone to pilot training in the U.S. So there was an affinity there, and we thought less of a threat. But we overflew Iran, and I remember flying by Mount Ararat, which I thought was kind of cool, and nothing happened. We got all our aircraft back, but it was a pretty good exercise. That for a lot of us, flying in that area of the world, which was totally different. I have to bring up, not all that great. I actually led an attack of F-111s and F-4s to the fleet out in the Arabian Sea, and we attacked the wrong fleet. So we had everything turned off because we had one of our EWOs on board the, I forget the name of the control ship. It was a U.S. thing. But we knew that the Navy, they were going to pick us up way out. I hate TASMO. I never thought it was a good mission for fighter aircraft. Tactical Air Supported Maritime Operations, TASMO. But we had everything turned off. Our terrain following radar, everything locked and stowed, so we weren't giving any kind of chance to have anything pick us up and emit back to the fleet. But they were picking us up, and so everything was visual. We were down low, way out, 100 miles, 200 miles out from land. And I found something. I took a peek on radar, and I led a wonderful attack that hit the NATO fleet. So, but lesson learned.
So you were going against the NATO versus the U.S. Navy.
It was kind
fleet,
of NATO. They had a blue fleet, a red fleet kind of thing, and it was clearly identified. That was not my problem. My problem was that I just locked onto the wrong thing. But another lesson learned there.
That's tough. I mean, you're down low. You can't see that far. You know what I mean? Especially if you're popping up for a radar. Like, that's tough.
Exactly.
Tough as crap to see.
Same thing happened. We were attacking Masra Air Base in Pakistan. We were coming in, as I said, I remember 16, 20 feet off the water, 620 knots. On radar and visually, you can't pick anything up because the world is going by so fast. So you have to pop up a little bit to take a quick look and then go back down. That was another, as a weapons and tactics officer, I thought that was a great exercise for us because we learned so many things that we had not thought about before.
Did you, to like pull this thread back to what we were talking about last episode, did you take some of that with you as you were getting ready for Desert Storm? Obviously, it's kind of same terrain, same flat stuff, but as you were looking at the targets and the attacks, were you thinking about that at all, or had the tactics just changed too
Half a
much?
little bit, but I think more in my mind was for Desert Shield, Desert Storm was that I had spent 4.5 years in CENTAF as a weapons and tactics officer, and I was at one time the chief of the targeting cell for Iran in that area of the world. So, but when I led the targeting for Southwest Asia for the Air Force, actually for CENTCOM in the mid 80s, that was before the nodal analysis kind of campaign plan that was used in Desert Storm. Precision was not, I mean, we wanted precision, but we didn't have the assets to do that. So the targeting was different. I mean, when I looked at targets, it was more of the traditional interdiction and airfield attack, OCA kind of thing, where we hit airfields, we'd hit bridges and things like that, command structures. But we didn't have all the precision. And that was just a matter of the NATO aircraft at that time, and the U.S. aircraft were not equipped with enough targeting pods. So the whole targeting was different. So what I brought forward mostly for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I had studied that part of the world in graduate school too, at the Naval Postgraduate School. So I didn't get the Arabic training, which I had desired to do, but I knew the culture. I had flown over there. I had flown previous times with the Omanis and in Egypt and things like that when I was a member of CENTAF. And so I kind of understood how the Allies would work, and I knew the geography and the terrain and things like that, and the enormity of the target system, I mean, being so geographically dispersed. And I, having been part of the team that developed the tactics for that part of the world, that helped a lot because I knew what to expect, whereas the other aircrew from Lakenheath had no idea because they were trained for a European type of conflict against the Russians. And our target sets, less air refueling, not flying an attack package is entirely different. But I'm trying to think now, my time in Pakistan and over Iran, maybe a little bit as far as getting a feel for the region, but it was more of, an eye-opener for a lot of us in Pakistan about there's a whole lot of things out there that we're good at, and there's a lot of things that we're not good at, like going after a surface fleet. They'll find you.
Yeah.
And
I think an interesting point in that time.
Our EWO told us they were finding us and we don't know how they picked what we were emitting because we thought we had everything turned off. What were they picking up that enabled them to find us? And we were below 50 feet off the water, 50 miles out. So it's tough.
Dash 4 probably had their radar on still.
There's that one time I put
the
radar on to take a peek, and I think that was it.
Dash 4's like, sorry, the first lieutenant or the second lieutenant.
I was a young kid who should have known better.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting too at that time of history is, so many times we've gone from enemies to allies over the course, like we're now Germany, Japan, staunch allies of ours, where here you're flying with the Iranian Air Force as an ally, and then the next day you can't even fly over there because you think you might. So to then turn not necessarily an enemy, but to a foe, certainly is that had to be an interesting feeling.
Yeah.
And obviously it affected everything for the next 40 some years.
Well,
that's why we don't have F-14s that at the air show circuit. So
it's so, and then to hear the people who trained the Iranian F-14 pilots or the F-14 enthusiasts who just feel sick to see those jets still on Iranian runways. It's a deeply held feeling.
I have to admit, the last couple of days, seeing the precision weapons hitting the F-4s in Iran, they're the last few aircraft.
Yeah, it's got to hurt.
Yeah.
It got to hurt the heart.
Well, another point I didn't bring up is that we had guys in the squadron in the 484th when we were in Pakistan who actually had gone to pilot training with some of the Iranian pilots. So that's why, it backed up what the intel told us that, if you have to put the aircraft anywhere, southern bases was probably more friendly and then pick an Air Force base like Esfahan was the one that we all kind of liked because some of the guys, I forget names, but they actually knew Iranian pilots they had gone to pilot training with that were at Esfahan. So, yeah,
Gotcha.
times change.
Best chance of.
Yeah,
Yeah,
crazy.
Esfahan was one of the places that we struck on the 6-Day War. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the
I
Midnight
was,
Hammer strike. Yeah, that was
yeah, I was the big, along with Fordow. Yeah.
yeah.
Very interesting.
So stepping back then into what we were talking about last show. So Desert Storm's over. You guys have done a really nice job. You already kind of told the story of you get back and, you're immediately met with the great news of turning your squadron over and shutting it down. But can you talk initially what that felt like to go back to Lakenheath? Clearly, like you had mentioned just earlier, they weren't prepared for this mission. It was supposed to be a completely different mission. And now you guys kicked ass to be honest. And
it was not just
what was that high like? And then well, not just you guys, but the whole wing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only did the definitive study about the Gulf War Air Power Survey consider the F-111F from our wing to be the most effective aircraft in the war, we felt it too. And particularly, as you said a couple of minutes ago, that we had trained for a European NATO EUCOM type of mission against the Russians, and this was an entirely different type of not only geography, but the operational procedures and the air tasking process and the targeting process, and then how we flew in attack packages was all foreign to the 111 guys. In fact, the 18 crews that first went, I had the week before we deployed, because I had helped build those tactics. I was briefing these guys on a whole different way of, it was very tanker dependent too, and air refueling. And the guys couldn't believe that. But that ever more so when we came back and how well we did, I think that fed the overall feeling that, man, we went to something that we were not really prepared for or supposed to go to, and we did so well. Then you get back, and I forget the timing. I can ask this of some of my friends, but I think I told you last episode that's when the wing commander called the 4 squadron commanders in, and he said, bad news. The Air Force decided to retire the aircraft. And it was a combination of shock and anger and disbelief. But it hit the wing hard. I mean, when the word got out, of course it did after that meeting to all the squadron. We went back and told the squadrons. People couldn't believe that, for all that was put into that was how we're being paid back. And I think the rationale that we were given, that the Air Force felt that the F-111 is too hard, too much money to maintain, was, hard to take for a lot of people. It's probably true. I've never heard otherwise, but it was rough. And then, but the wing went ahead. Then I think most of the young aircrew, we got into the mode where then the squadron commanders went out, and we were told most of the aircrew were going to transition to the F-15E. So I think that mitigated a lot of the frustration and anger, because guys thought, okay, I'm going to a new aircraft. But the senior guys, there only be a handful of majors and maybe, I think, 1 or 2. My ops officer actually went to the F-15E. But most of the senior guys were not going to transition. It was all the younger guys. But I think that whole process of them then going to a new airframe kind of made things a little bit more tolerable. But for my squadron, we had like 8-9 months to get ready to retire.
Okay. And as the squadrons, like the younger guys transitioning to the Strike Eagle, it was only Seymour Johnson that had Strike Eagles at that point, right? So that, like, Mountain Home didn't have them yet. So were you going to be the second base with Strike Eagles, or how did that work?
You were breaking up a little bit there, but we knew that the aircraft, the F-111Fs from Lakenheath, were actually going to move to the U.S. to the 27th Wing at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico. So those who weren't picked to go to the F-15E were going to move with the aircraft to Cannon.
Okay.
If that's what you're asking.
I was just, yeah, sorry if I was breaking up. I was kind of asking the reverse. So the younger guys, the reason they couldn't pick the senior guys is because they didn't have a lot of F-15 squadrons at that point, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, got it. But that's interesting that they at least kept with the F-111Fs and were able to go to Cannon for some of the older guys.
It was. It was pretty competitive. I felt for the young air crew who were not selected, but not everybody could go. So yeah, the F-111Fs went to Cannon only for like 3 years before they were retired, and then those squadrons were replaced by F-16s.
Okay.
Did everyone transition at that point who had not transitioned before? Can you hear me, Rusty?
You're breaking
Oh,
up
no.
a little bit.
That's so weird. Okay, so we're not getting that. I think it's on your. Is it?
Yeah.
Are you hearing it? Because I didn't hear Taco break up. Okay, can you hear us better now?
I can't.
Okay, great. So my question was, is that the point, that 3 year point, did some of the guys who didn't transition before get to transition to F-16s, or was it kind of over and done with for them?
I don't think anybody went to F-16s. It might have been one or two. I know I had some guys, in fact, a couple
Okay.
of flight commanders that went to A-10s. And some, even after the aircraft was retired at Cannon, a few of the people went to F-15Es from that point. I mean, it was a similar mission, so
Okay.
it made a lot of sense.
Yeah. And how much time did you end up having in command before you had to give it up?
How much time did I have in command?
Yeah.
About a year. It was close.
Man, that's a bummer.
But yeah.
And so as you were shutting down the squadron, were you, you should have had a little bit more time in the seat. How did that look like transitioning and then trying to get a new job? And can you tell us like where you went next after that?
I wasn't, the wing commander asked me what I wanted to do, and I was kind of like, I didn't want to go to war college. So I was kind of like, I was concentrating on retiring the squadron. But what happened was, often like when the generals came to fly with the wing, they'd put it with my squadron. And I did that with a few generals, and there was the 3rd Air Force commander, Major General Chuck Link, who flew in my squadron. And after we flew, he came to the squadron pub, and we sat there and drank a couple of beers and talked about geopolitics and the Gulf War and a lot of things. And just before I retired the squadron, the wing commander said, General Link would like you to be director of operations of the 3rd Air Force. Would you do it? And I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I did that. I retired the squadron. And then actually General Link had told me, he said, all right, you're going to come over, but I haven't gotten rid of the guy you're replacing yet. So he gave me a couple odd jobs to do. And I actually deployed with the 493rd to provide comfort, which was it was interesting because the 493rd commander had been my ops officer for a while. And here I was, more senior guy flying with his squadron. And we had to have a little talk, and it all worked out great. That, hey, I'm here to have fun, and I'll be an instructor, and I'll fly with the young guys. And I got to fly maybe 10 combat missions over northern Iraq doing that. Came back, then I took the job at 3rd Air Force, and it was an interesting job. I used to go back to Lakenheath a lot. There was talk about me keeping my currency or getting checked out in the F-15E, but it turned out they thought I'll just keep flying the F-111. And then when the final squadron left Lakenheath in late 92, I started flying the F-111E at Upper Hayford. And I did that until they left. And in 3rd Air Force, General Link and I did a lot of things that were in doctrine, strategy, and things like that. And we wrote a lot of things for USAFE. And at that point, I remember General Link called me in the office and he said, General Oakes, at that time, who was the commander of U.S. Air Force in Europe, 4-star, he wants you to go work for him directly, be his doctrine and strategy advisor. And he knew I didn't want to do that. And he said, you can't tell the 4-star no, but I can. And he said, so here's the deal that he made for me. And he said, you will still work here, but twice a month, you'll fly over to Ramstein and you'll work with General Oakes. And I did that, and I kind of enjoyed that. And one of the jobs they gave me was to go to EUCOM and write the European Command JFAC CONOPS, which was the Joint Force Air Component Commander concept of operations. It's kind of like what I had done before Desert Storm and was then improved in Desert Storm as far as how you get the tasking out and the command relations and things like that. And I remember working with the J3, Admiral Frost, Dave Frost, who had been a carrier battle group commander in Desert Storm, and he fought me all the way because the Navy, of course, didn't like the Air Force way of doing the air tasking order. And here I am writing the thing that he's a J3 for, but yet it was a challenge. He made it tough for me. But about 6-7 years ago, I was working for when I was advisor to the Director of Missile Defense. Admiral Frost and Frosty, had a chance to work together on another adversary in a classified thing, and I had to tell him, "Do you remember who I am?" And he said, "Sure I do." He said, "But back then I was doing what I needed to do, as a Navy saw how to run a fight." So I'm glad to say that after all that time, like during Desert Storm, how the services didn't quite get along together. There's different tasks in different areas and sectors that were given to each other. But I think the U.S. has really improved upon that a lot from Desert Storm time. So I did that, and I wrote the JFAC CONOPS. I wrote a couple of things for EUCOM and for USAFE. And then I was selected to go by EUCOM to be the Director of Allied Operations in Provide Comfort, which became the Northern Iraq No-Fly Zone. And I did that for 7 months. That was a challenge. I had been to Turkey before. It was interesting. We had a British squadron. We had a French squadron, Mirages. We had F-15Es. We had F-15Cs. Of course, we had a special ops detachment, Allied special ops in Iraq, northern Iraq. So I'd go out to northern Iraq to work with them quite a bit, and we would visit the Kurdish villages, and that was another eye-opener, working with that and the challenges that they have. And then, of course, we had to work the no-fly zone, which was a challenge, too, because Iraq was still testing us every which way. I got to fly a couple times, but not a lot. That wasn't my job. We then were told in spring of 1994 that there was just across the no-fly zone, there was a Iraqi fort called Fort Faydah, Faydah, and our Special Forces Detachment had driven along that road December of 93 timeframe, and they were fired on with Dushkas, 50 caliber, few mortars. And so President Clinton and his Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, had told us we need to do that again. We need to prove to the Iraqis that we have freedom of movement in northern Iraq and they cannot fire on us. So we planned an operation with the JFAC, Spider Richardson. I kind of oversaw part of that. And I came up with an idea that I think what we can do is leverage Desert Storm by using PSYOPs and trying to tell the Iraqis in that fort, don't you dare fire on us. And I was a lot of people didn't see the utility of that, but I was able to get the 4th PSYOPs Battalion people to deploy to Turkey. And I worked with them to design a leaflet that showed an Iraqi soldier with a laser-guided bomb falling on his head. In Arabic, it said, "You remember what we did in Desert Storm? You know how good we are. We know where you live. We know where you sleep. Don't make us kill you. Don't fire on the special forces." So we had those leaflets printed up, and we had Iraqi truck drivers, civilian, who go all over Iraq. They were spreading them everywhere. And then they came to the operation. I mean, we picked those targets. And I knew a lot of the guys in the F-15Es because I'd been their commander in F-111s. And we had targets picked out, and we were ready to pounce. And the general wouldn't let me fly on it. And so I asked, can I be in the convoy? And he said, no, you can't do that either. But he allowed me to be on the hill overlooking that with the Special Forces Detachment, with our radios and all that, and with Peshmerga guards. And the French squadron their QI, which was their State Department, had told them, you are not going to drop bombs. There's no way we're going to let you do that. So the French colonel was a cool guy. And we talked, and he said, what if we fly low over the fort? No weapons, but just to scare them. So between us, we thought about, yes. And we put more leaflets in their speed brakes. And so on the day of the mission, I'm on the hill overlooking this thing. And we had aircraft ready to pounce. They were all in the air. I mean, you could tell they're aircraft way up in the sky. And their first thing was the Mirages came through Grayman. Well, they weren't going that fast because we wanted the leaflets to fall, but they were really low. Got over the fort, and they opened up the speed brakes, and more leaflets came down. And then we were ready to bomb, as we had told the Iraqis we would. But it was about just a minute or two after the leaflets were dropped by the Mirages, we saw the back gates open up, and hundreds of Iraqi soldiers just ran south. So we called off the attack and went back to Turkey, and the French colonel and I didn't buy a drink for, I think, a week, because that worked out well. Although a lot of guys really a lot of guys wanted to drop bombs, but, we did it differently.
That's awesome. That's a great story.
It's really awesome. It's cool how much you got to work with special operations in your career in different points, and be such a part of what they were doing.
And it's another time in my career.
Not part of the conventional mission there.
I've had, come to think of it, I've had to work with Special Forces and SEALs like 3 or 4 different times in my career. And not sure if I mentioned, but back in 85, Jim Guest, who is Brigadier General Guest, was commander of the 5th Special Forces Group. And he and I had worked together doing classified targeting at the CENTCOM. And he came up to see my 3-star, and we're sitting there, just the 3 of us. And out of nowhere, General Guest said to General Piotrowski, can I have Rusty for a year? And did I tell you this? And I had no idea what he was talking about, but apparently General Pete said, why do you need him for a year? He said, well, jump school, and then he'll be the first Air Force fighter guy to go through the complete Special Forces training, and he'll be able to wear a Special Forces flash on his fight suit. And my first thought was, I knew what those guys went through, and I'm thinking, oh shit. And I wasn't looking forward to jumping out of an aircraft, at night at 300 feet. But my general said, I can't let him go. He's writing a tactics manual for CENTAF, so I didn't do that. But yes, I've had a lot of. I have been on patrol with SEALs and Special Forces. I think I told you in the other episode. I've been shot at with SEALs on the Amazon.
On the skip.
I used to visit
that was
Special
fun.
Forces teams, and well, the SEALs thought it was fun. But yeah,
right,
and then
because they're SEALs.
With John Mulholland and a whole bunch of other ODA team captains and SEAL platoon leaders and squad commanders on the ground lasing. I went out in the field a lot with them, and then had to do it again in Iraq, and it was very professional. I got to learn. I mean, those guys would come to South Carolina to my house sometimes, and we just did different conferences, and I'd go out to Coronado, work with the SEALs, or to Fort Bragg, and I really got to appreciate not only how professional they were, but how different their missions were. And some people kind of lop them together, like SEALs and Special Forces, but they do very different things, and they do it in very different ways, as you probably know. So yeah, I've been fortunate in my career to do a little bit of that. And that I didn't realize really cool. The PSYOPs. I forget how PSYOPs got into my mind for the Operation FIDA, but just last week I was trying to. I know I have a copy of that leaflet somewhere here in Arabic, and I was looking.
That'd be really cool to see.
I couldn't find it. I know I have it around the house here. I'll find it, but I looked online, and there are actually. I found out the 4th PSYOPs Battalion at Fort Bragg. They actually did a lot of leaflets in Desert Storm, just a year or two before that. And so they used leaflets a lot, both before Desert Storm than after, to convince people to do, to not get in harm's way, for one thing, but also to be more cooperative with the Allied forces. So I mean, I'm a believer. I actually picked it up early in my career about as a tactics officer that I like the psychological dimensions of tactics because I learned that working with the black hole in Desert Shield, Desert Storm too, that and in the conferences after Desert Storm, when I went to as an Air Force rep to the kind of the major post Desert Storm conferences, what had all the commanders there talking about what did we do right, what did we do wrong. And I remember a very great briefing lady, a PhD from IDA, Institute for Defense Analysis. She gave a briefing on how we often get locked into ethnocentric targeting, where we target things thinking about, well, if we hit that, that would be hurt us badly. We learned in Desert Storm that Saddam sometimes didn't care about what we hit. And so we couldn't put our Western mind into the mindset of Saddam and his people. And I'm sure it's going on today, but we've gotten a lot better at that. You don't pick a target because you think, well, that would hurt us. You have to put yourself into the mindset of the people you're targeting and the commanders and what means something to them. So the whole bit about the psychological effect of combat. I developed a tactic in the early 80s. One of the targets we had in Iran, even a Soviet MRD, a motorized rifle division, will have hundreds of tanks. And them coming down the mountain roads in Iran, we're talking 12 to 14,000 foot mountains. And there are these bridges. That's why we got into using special forces to lasers, because we didn't have aircraft that could get that deep that had a laser designator. But the special ops guys could get there. And they could get within a click or two of these bridges, and then I could have 111s with laser-guided bombs hit those things. Then I started thinking, well, once you hit that bridge, now you've got a Soviet column backed up for maybe 50 to 100 miles. And how do you hit them? And because the Russians would put a construction battalion in the lead element, so they would repair that bridge quickly. So I started looking at, okay, dropping CBU, things like that. Then I had this idea. A friend of mine actually at Red Flag went supersonic in an area he shouldn't have, and he did the worst possible thing. He saw one of those, like a motorhome in the desert where you have the contractors with the electronic warfare things. He knew he was supersonic, and he was approaching it, so he banked real hard, not realizing that supersonic overpressure is perpendicular to the path of the aircraft. So he centralized the overpressure from going supersonic. It blew the thing over, and the contractors got hurt. He was grounded for a long time. Hit me in my mind, though. So I'm thinking, what if we strip 111s, no ordnance, and we go supersonic over these backed up forces? And I talked to fight surgeons and things like that, and they said, oh, nasty. Not only are you going to break windows and eyeglasses, and the Soviets at that time had all tube radios, so you're going to make them, deaf, dumb, and blind. Plus, some people you fly over are going to be catatonic. The overpressure from going supersonic, and you're going to kill people, you're going to maim people, and they're going to have no idea what happened to them. I briefed my generals, and they thought, no, we don't fly into combat without weapons. So, but it was in my mind. Then, third night of the Gulf War, coming back off our target Balad airfield, going supersonic, and going over Republican Guards Division, and they had all their lights on, and we could see trucks moving and all that. So we flew supersonic at 200 feet over as much of that built-up area as we could, knowing I'd never found out what the damage was, but I know that we probably turned trucks over. We left people catatonic. It's pretty rough when you have that happen to you. So,
wow.
But
Yeah.
again, it gets back to the psychological. It's just not kinetic dropping bombs that we could do, But
yeah, it's what else?
Yeah, that's
Unattributable other things.
Yeah, the ethnocentric targeting, that's really interesting. It goes back to Sun Tzu, right? Just know thy enemy, and if you put yourself into them, and what would they care about? Like I never thought of it that way. That's really interesting.
I'm not surprised that you did think of
Well,
it, Rusty, because it just seems like this is your thought. It's the whole like defense, offense, the game, right? The game playing that we've talked about so
It's a
many different
really good
times.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I think targeting and developing a campaign plan, I learned a lot in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, because I think General Glosson, Dave Deptula, and the guys in the Black Hole, they were approaching warfare. At that time, it was novel. I mean, sometimes the Air Force was blasted because of the shock and awe thing and all that, and they focused on nodal analysis. But, it became a pretty big thing in the Pentagon after that. I remember having a tour of a facility with an OSD team that did basically just that. I'm not sure what I can say, but where they would look at an adversary, and they would have actually people who had all kinds of different disciplines, electrical engineers and people who knew about water supplies and things like that. And that was applied in, as we talked about in an earlier episode, in Desert Storm with nodal analysis, where if you find that sweet spot, you can take a whole system down. And that applies to a lot of things in the targeting world. That you don't have to take everything out. You just have to hit something. We're seeing real time here. Again, I am amazed at the Israelis. What they do, what they've done in Lebanon, what they've done in Iran, it's incredible how what I've just been talking about for a couple of minutes, the Israelis are doing that, and they're probably the best in the world. And taking out the leadership.
Yeah. Ayatollah, second Ayatollah, gone.
Yeah.
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 Still, man, the beepers. I'm just like, dude, that was wow. But obviously that wasn't this.
That's
But
the
that
long
was,
game. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, yeah, they don't play. They don't come to play, because it is their lives. They have such a different threat level than we do here. So of course they have to come hard.
It's every day, and it's a doorstep threat. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I've just seen on television a couple of times, which I think maybe we're saying too much, because the Chinese are listening to everything we do. And, they're going to improve upon what our adversaries failed to do. But I just heard on television like 3 or 4 times that the Israelis have found out that how you locate these leaders, they won't use their cell phones because they know they'll give them away. But Mossad looked for their bodyguards who kept their cell phones on. And they're able to tell where the leaders were based on the cell phones of their bodyguards. I mean, that kind of thinking, to me, has taken the whole targeting thing of developing a war plan. Just, there's so many different things you can do if you just become innovative.
Heck, look at El Mencho. They tracked El Mencho by his like OnlyFans girlfriend. Like
I didn't know that.
yeah, that's what I read, and I'm gonna make sure that that's true before I go putting this into the episode. But they absolutely, it was that was. I could be very wrong. Now I'm
no
like,
free
now
plugs
I'm
for
really
OnlyFans.
like, shit.
No
hold
free
on.
plugs
What
for
if,
OnlyFans.
What if I was wrong? No, I'm fairly certain at least it was a girlfriend. It might not have been OnlyFans. That might have been a nonsense. But yeah, I mean, they significant other. And El Mencho was never going to get found on his own. And CIA, I think, was tracking him, and we gave that information to the Mexicans, which there's so much undercurrent now. What we see in the news is just like a snippet of the iceberg underneath all of it. And it's so cool that, to hear about your role in some of those things that now, I mean, we see it ever
like
more
the
now.
thing that I mentioned about Desert Storm, that I think a big effect that helped the 111s out was that the SAMs were being shot at us, but they were being shot ballistically because they were turning their radars off. Yeah. Because the Iraqis were listening to our radios, and they knew that there were F-4G wild wheels in the air, and they knew when they called Magnum, there was a harm coming down on them. So that's the part of warfare that I think that I kind of like. I always like tactics. Going back to the guy I learned the most from in F4s at Osan. He was chief of weapons and tactics, and he had 2 gun kills in Vietnam. He was really good air to air, and it first hit me that the F4 smoked a lot. The engines we had, not the RAF engines, but he developed a tactic where you would actually come into the fight, and you wanted lead to smoke like hell. So you're staying out of min AB, so you would smoke a lot to get the adversary to look at you. Meanwhile, his wingman is up here in min AB and not smoking. So you take your limitation and turn it into your advantage. That kind of got me on the mode of there's more to warfare than just dropping bombs. There's a logical thinking process to that. Anyway,
And
Gary Rubens was
no,
his
that's
name.
interesting. And did you take that with you? So the next step you go to, from my notes, is you went to the Pentagon for the director of Deep Strike, right?
Yeah, from Mildenhall at 3rd Air Force, General Oakes wanted me to be different commander jobs in Europe, or he put me in to be the EUCOM guy on the Joint Staff for an OSD. But at that time, the Air Force Chief of Staff, General McPeak, had a rule that to get one of the plum jobs that were a fast track to general, you had to be 3 years below the zone to colonel. I was not. So I was put in for a lot of cool jobs, but I was redlined because I was not 3 years early to colonel. So finally, they sent me to the Pentagon, and my first job there was working for the chief, actually. And it was the director of the Roles and Commission group that responded to congressional studies and things like that for about 6 months. And then they created a thing called the Deep Attack Group, and I became the director of that. And we fought the fight with Joint Staff, OSD, and the services to, at that time, for the B-2 and the F-22, war games, studies, a lot of meetings to kind of look at the Pentagon was refighting the Gulf War, and I learned early that we weren't getting along that well. Each service wanted a share of the budget, and of course, part of that meant that you had a part of the strategy. And unfortunately, they were still refighting the Gulf War into like 94, 95 when I got there. And I was there in a lot of tank sessions with the chief or the vice chief, when the Army was saying, we killed more tanks than anybody else. But I had the data that showed that F-111s killed more tanks than anybody else. Things like that. But it's all about budget and having a bigger share of the DoD budget. So that was kind of what my office did. And we got involved in studies and things like that and war games. I worked a lot with RAND Corporation. Did that for about 3 years.
And that was when you ended active duty, is that correct at that point? Or am I
was
using...
active duty.
Right.
No, I think you're retired out of the Pentagon, right?
Right. That was your last...
I was in the Pentagon 94 through 98. Early 98.
Okay.
And I retired.
Got it.
How was that transition for you? We always ask that, was it strange to go from being active duty to being a veteran?
Not really, because I had a couple of generals that advised me. Chuck Link I worked for Chuck Link again in the Pentagon. And I also worked for John Jumper, who was a great guy. He was director of operations. And when I was retiring, General Jumper said, okay, they both told me that I'll get a lot of job offers. I was getting job offers like a year or two out before retiring. And then the one I regret turning down was at RAND Corporation. RAND offered me a job. It was kind of split. Half my time would be for Project Air Force doing air combat type of stuff. And the other half was doing geopolitical things for Zalmay Khalilzad, who I really liked him. I liked the way he looked at things. But I turned it down, and I turned it down because it's money. As an FFRDC, they couldn't offer that much, and the big companies were offering me a lot more. And so I did that. General Jumper said, I don't care what company you go to, but go to a small company and I'll send a lot of money your way and you'll do the same thing you're doing for me on active duty. So the answer to your question, Beth, is that my transition was, the only difference was I'm doing the same thing. I still kept my old, in my old office, I had a little cubicle there. But I was wearing a suit, not a flight suit. And I did that for a long time. I supported the Joint Staff and OSD and, of course, the Air Force and combat ops and applied things like that. And I had a wonderful time working with a lady called Michelle Flournoy, who was at one time director of policy in the Pentagon. In fact, Obama wanted to make her Secretary of Defense, the first female. She and I did some things looking at different possible geopolitical futures and how the world might look 5, 10, 15 years out, and how that would drive the different force structure DoD needed, which I thought was really interesting. It kind of combined a lot of things I had worked on before. Very interesting stuff. And I did that for a while. I developed different processes to automate. I had a software team I hired. We developed automated programs that looked at force structure for those different kind of futures and force availability, depending on, two war kind of thing. And if we had a lot of engagement going on, if we had a major theater war kind of operation, developed those kind of processes. And then I became a vice president of a company. And then the CEO said, okay, we're paying you too much money as the vice president. I don't want you doing the operation anymore. I want you to go out there and get business. That's not what I like doing. So I quit that job. Then I took a job as an advisor to the director of missile defense. And I really enjoyed that, even though missile defense was totally out of my experience level. But it was interesting. I did that for about 10, 15 years. And main purpose I helped with was I became one of our major adversaries. I became a missile defense person for that. And I got involved in a lot of nice classified studies in the Pentagon, working with Michelle Flournoy when she was director of policy, and a friend of mine who was then the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Marine 4-star, Haas Cartwright. Haas, F-18 pilot, F-4 before that, and Marine Corps. And we became friends as colonels in the Pentagon earlier. And they led a study that I was part of for like 2 or 3 years. And it was very, very interesting. Enjoyed the hell out of that. And then what I also did was I would advise the director, deputy director, depending on the admiral or Army or Air Force general, about threats from our different adversaries. And I had access to the right intel, and I'd go in sometimes on a Sunday morning and brief them in a quiet setting about, here's what I take about what may happen. So that was very interesting. And then did that until the traffic going to the Pentagon got to be 2 hours each way. So I stopped working.
You had your fingers in so many different pots. That's awesome.
It is really amazing to think about that.
And I think as we kind of wrap up here, the last couple of questions, want to be respectful of your time. But so in the modern times now, you touched on it a little bit in previous episodes about, your love for the culture, fighter culture, and, the squadrons. And then, so you're bringing back the history of kind of the F-111 and Lake and Heath itself. So can you talk a little bit more about what you're doing now to bring that stuff back?
You broke up a little bit there. You're asking about bringing back some of the F-111 traditions and history?
Yeah, and then kind of how you're doing it now. So how are you doing in the current time?
Yeah, I was invited back October 1st, 2021, when they reactivated my squadron, the 495th, as an F-35 squadron. And they found in that process that there was almost zero history in the wing, even about the Gulf War. So the wing commander at that time and the commander of Air Forces Europe asked me at the bar, would you lead an effort to help bring back this history? And I've been doing that since. And part of that process, a great vehicle is having reunions there at Lake and Heath every couple of years. And we have relocated things like the gold-plated sword and daggers that the Saudis gave us after Desert Storm. Other memorabilia. One thing we gave the wing in July was an incredible thing. The 495th had an aircraft shot down in the Libya raid, Karma 5-2. Fernando Ribas Dominici and Paul Lawrence. Pretty sure they were shot down by an SA-6 on egress. And you were a kid at the time, but the problem was that only one body washed up on shore and a helmet. The helmet had Paul Lawrence's name on it, and the body everybody thought was Paul Lawrence. But Gaddafi held the body for 2 years. After 2 years, he gave it to the Vatican, and it was at that time they found out it was actually Fernando's body. But he had kept the body. So what Gaddafi did, he didn't want to be bombed again, so he had an American flag handmade to put over the casket. Well, Fernando's widow, Blanca, donated that flag, and we gave it to the wing in July, this past July. So things like that were kind of capturing the old memorabilia we had, and at the same time, we're rebuilding the history. I've contacted a lot of people. I'm getting commanders and down to crew chiefs, getting inputs from them about what happened. And what the wing commander told me this past July is what they like about the history we're providing the wing. We're going far beyond just filling the gaps that they were missing, but it's history told by the guys who made it. And that's kind of been special. One thing we did is that we're bringing back traditions we had that now they're expanding, adapting them, and I think making them better. When I retired the 485th, I asked the wing if I could do a funeral procession because we're closing the squadron, and a New Orleans-style funeral procession. And we did that, where on the march to the monument that we built there on base at Lakenheath, we did a slow march New Orleans style because we were honoring the guys who were killed. We had 16 guys killed, 4 in combat deployments, and the other guys were killed in peacetime accidents. But we did the slow march to honor them, the guys who died, and also to honor the squadron. And now we've expanded to the whole wing, the F-111 wing, of the great success we had. So the slow march to the monument, then at the monument that we constructed, we did a nickel on the grass ceremony where I had different 111 guys read the name of often a friend who was killed in combat or a peacetime accident, put a nickel on the grass. Then we do a toast using Jeremiah Weed, which is, I worked for the guy who started that tradition, by the way. Yeah, it's revolt. I actually have been to the bar in the desert in Nevada with the old bartender that started the idea. A year after this whole thing happened.
I didn't think that bar existed. I thought that was just a story.
My boss in Weapons and Tactics in CENTAF, he was the guy who jumped out of an F-4 at Nellis, and then he went back a year later to find the aircraft, and he went to this bar in the middle of nowhere, and they started playing 4, 5, 6. And they took the money from this poor bartender. And so they finally said, okay, we want to teach you how to drink afterburners. And they said, do you have anything kind of like a brand or something that we can, light, and then how an afterburner goes? So the guy said, I don't, but I have this. And he brought out a bottle of Jeremiah Weed, and they all did it. And the poor guy he looked like an old prospector. He had a big beard. I've met the guy. And so he tried to do the afterburner like the fighter pilots did, and he just splashed all over his beard, and his face was on fire. And so they felt sorry for the guy because he got burned doing a trick that they taught him. So they bought a case of Jeremiah Weed, took it back to the Oak Club at Nellis, and that started the whole tradition. A year later, I'm working for North Nelson, and of course we'd go out to Nellis every summer for 7 weeks to run the RDF Red Flag. And of course we got in a 4-wheel drive, and he took me up there, and plus all our parties in our unit for 4 years, we had to drink Jeremiah Weed, which I hated. But so that's the story of Jeremiah Weed, the real story. And so we introduced that to the guys at Lakenheath. They incorporated that into the nickel on the grass ceremony. And then whether we had a band, or the last 2 times we've had a Scottish pipe band. And at my signal, we do the New Orleans style happy march, drinking beer on the way back to the Oak Club. And we do that now, opposed to the slow march to the monument that we're honoring the guys who were killed and the loss of the 111 wing. On the way back, we're honoring the friendship of those guys, and we're celebrating our success. And then we go to the club, we do some toasts to the Queen, to the King, to the President. We'd set a table for the 16 guys were killed, so we could toast them. Then we go out to the patio, and we, the 495th Valkyrie Band, and yes, they have their own band. They're pretty good. They played Jeremiah Weed by Dos Gringos and Throw a Nickel on the Grass by Dick Jonas. And we sang, and it was cool. The old guys were in flight suits, drinking Jeremiah Weed. And yes, they found Jeremiah Weed. And to see young F-35 and F-15 pilots and Wizzos, male and female, they know all the words of these songs, and they're toasting with Jeremiah Weed. I had, at different times, both the vice wing commander and the wing commander come to me and say how great this is. These guys are having fun, and it's great to have these old traditions come back, and they're adding to them. Then after that, what they added to it, after the little thing, drinking Jeremiah Weed, singing the songs, we went out to the grassy area behind the club, and in the RAF tradition, we burned a piano, which is a whole nother
really cool
excitement.
That's how you build culture.
Yeah,
we brought some of that back, and it's great to see. I mean, it's so comforting for the older guys to see these 25, 26-year-old pilots loving to hear about the history. And I got to tell you, though, today, they're deployed making their own history, which is kind of cool.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
and I actually told that to Winder, the wing commander, General Arthod, in July, as I'm getting off the stage, and he's getting off the stage after we gave him some other presentations and all that. He said, "Thank you for sharing our history," because I like that, because he realized it's their history too. And he said, "Oh, by the way, I've got a unit deployed. You know where the 483rd is right now?" And I said, "I have an idea." And he told me, and I said, "Looks like you guys are making your own history." And as we just talked about, they're doing that today. So
absolutely,
it's good to see.
Yeah.
The wing asked for, they lost the history, and we helped bring it back, and now they're taking it and.
Well said. Well, and there's one other spot we can find you right now. Speaking of the history, right? You're doing another podcast, and we're going to put that in the show links for sure. But can you kind of tell us about that podcast and at least where we can find it?
I have a good relationship with the Imperial War Museum in England. They have an American Air Museum at RAF Duxford. And going back when I retired the squadron, I've had a great relationship with them. I take the 111 guys there when we have a reunion, and we have a day there where we brief the British public, kind of pay them back about 111. They put me in contact with a guy, Wade Vaughn, who has a podcast on YouTube called Old Fly Guy Network. And he has been gracious. We've done 3 or 4 tapings now, and it's more about capturing F-111 history in England. The Libya raid, Desert Storm, Desert Shield, touched upon things like the Cold War era, sitting Victor Alert, Tactical Nuclear Alert. So a lot of different things, and it's working out pretty well. And what our plan is, with his full cooperation, is that when the series is done, and hopefully I'll do the same thing with your podcast, is send the links to the squadrons at Lakenheath so they have that. I think there's no better way to represent their history than to hear guys talk about it who made the history. And I'm working with the Imperial War Museum too, and the American Air Museum. We'd like to get these videos. They have an interactive display by the F-111 and the Gulf War exhibit in the American Air Museum. They actually came here in 2016 to film me in my office. And there's an interactive display of me talking about Desert Storm. I have a vision where they could take the same thing with these videos I'm getting different people from the 111 community to be part of that podcast, and the one you're doing here with me, if they could then take some of that, if you agree, and then maybe they could put that into interactive display where people can then hear about different parts of F-111 history. So, I mean, we're also writing. I've written some things with the help of a lot of people, input from a lot of, from crew chiefs up to wing commanders. And they've asked me, and next step is I'm writing a book about that. And the book's going to be called F-111Fs in England from Cold War to Gulf War. So we'll cover like the transition from NATO to out of area type of operations in Desert Storm. So
that's so great. Yeah,
we've got a long way to go.
That's so good though. But like to make the history tangible, and like I said just before, like that's how you build culture. That's how you create the new generation. Is people want to know what was before them and things that they're building on. I think that's super important. So that's awesome, Rusty. That's really cool.
It is cool.
Beth,
definitely is.
Beth, you got any more questions? What do you got?
So we always ask at the end about how flying and your career in flying, what it taught you about living life. So for you, what has that been?
I think in some ways, flying, what I've learned is like a continuum of, I think in the first podcast, I equated it to playing sports in college and high school, you know, the teamwork, and, you know, and you may have an important role, but you're part of a team and you need everybody else to be part of that. So I think my military career was kind of a continuation of that. And from that into life, I never really thought about it this way, but I think looking at what I learned in the military, you plan like crazy, but then you got to be ready to, you know, go with the flow and adapt as needed. But, you know, planning is important, but at the same time, you've got to be flexible to be able to react to whatever happens. And I'm sure there's more. I just really I never thought about that before. And, you know,
I think that's
getting back to history, you know, this past week, particularly, I've talked to a lot of guys I flew with, F4s and F-111s, and it's the friendships you make along the way and those memories, and they're shared memories. Often your friends will bring up things. Taki, you're going to see this 15 years from now. You guys will bring up things that you forgot about that were kind of cool things. So it's being part of the community. I think that is the lasting memory I have. And getting back to the history again is that a lot of the guys now are getting older, and the F-111 community, you know, we want to capture this stuff before it's gone. Realizing that, put in context, the wing is out there doing great stuff right now. So what we did is just a piece of that thing, but it's all connected. And, you know, we'll see what happens.
But you need every piece to make the puzzle, right? I think that's important.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think about,
absolutely.
You know, what about the 40th Tech Fighter Wing people that were in World War II? You know, the Cold War, you know, the aircraft that were there before us, the F-4s and the F-100s, and, you know, we've got to do, the wing has a historian now, and they're trying to capture that stuff so that they have that full continuum, because the wing goes back just prior to World War II.
Well, I definitely think you're doing your part, Rusty, so thank you for that.
Yeah. It's been so incredible to learn.
I had somebody just say a couple weeks ago that I phrased it, it kind of took with some people, that I look upon this as my last F-111 mission.
That's cool. That's really cool.
That is very cool. And it is so important. You've gotten to see so much of the F-111 history, and so it's poignant that you get to make sure it's remembered in a way that it didn't get remembered as well by everyone but you, who made sure that it was well lamented. But it's I feel like there are a lot of full circle moments in what we have heard about your career, Rusty, and it's just really cool to think about them all. You know, what you learned in Vietnam. Yeah, no, but That's the cool thing
I
about
think I was
life.
in the right place at the right time, or maybe the wrong place at the wrong time, but you know, it worked out okay.
Wrong place at the right time.
I think that there were some forces working where your life was concerned, Rusty, is what
Yeah.
it sounds like to me.
Well, thanks.
I've had such an awesome time learning from
Yeah.
you, and just your career is so incredible. It really has taught me a lot of things about what a military career can look like, because yours was very diverse, and I just thank you so much for sharing it with us, Rusty.
Yeah,
Well,
man.
thank you.
Thank you, Rube. So happy to meet you, Rusty.
Yeah. And just for everybody who's listening, thanks for being here with us, and we hope to see you again next time.